Hey everyone, welcome back to the Primatecast. On today's podcast, the Primatecast co-host and producer of Conservation Voices, Dr. Cécile Sarabian.
Evolution,
communication,
cognition,
conservation,
behavior,
primatology,
typically primates.
Become the monkey.
Okay, well thanks everyone for joining me on the Primatecast. This is podcast number 59, and the release date is Thursday, December the 9th, 2021. I'm really excited to be able to present this installment of the Primatecast to you because I'm actually joined by none other than my fellow co-host of the Primatecast and producer of Conservation Voices for the Primatecast, Dr. Cécile Sarabian. Cécile just finished up a postdoc sponsored by the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science here at Kyoto University's Primate Research Institute, where she spent pretty much the better part of the last 9 years with us conducting research. So there's kind of a good deal of tripping down memory lane in this podcast, but I promise that we did try to stay focused a little bit and talk about some pretty cool science that she's doing as well. So Cécile's made a bit of a name for herself internationally as a pioneering researcher focusing on the evolutionary origins of hygiene and disgust in the animal kingdom, especially in primates. So we talk about this research, including some of her experimental results, some discoveries she's made after presenting subjects with some pretty intriguing foraging decisions involving gross contaminants like feces and rotten food. And these have garnered a fair amount of appeal in the popular media as well. You can see a couple of those if you look at the show notes on the podcast website. But in the podcast, we also talk about Cécile's own development and the importance of mentors. And I promise I'm not tooting my own horn here with that one. But we spend some time talking about someone that's very important to Cécile, the late Dr. Val Curtis, who worked at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And her work in origins of disgust in animals and humans, and also her activism and work with, humanitarian work, trying to help people develop sanitary behaviors around the world, especially in places like India, for example, really inspired Cécile not only to think about research, but also to how to apply her research to forces as a force of good in the world. And so we talk about that in the podcast as well. So you've heard from Cécile quite a bit over the years on the Primatecast and Conservation Voices, but this time I'm happy that we can have her in the interviewee's chair for a turn of events, and I hope you all enjoy this episode with Dr. Cécile Sarabian. And just before we get into the interview, I want to highlight that you might notice some audio loss or quality loss in this interview. We couldn't use our regular studio setup, so we had to revert to a handheld recorder. It's definitely listenable, though, so I don't want to discourage anybody from sticking around, but just to keep that in mind. So here's the interview. So for the listeners, I'm sure we don't need a big introduction of you. You've been around here at the Primatecast for quite some time, and so 2012 was the first time that you turned up here. And can you maybe just talk about how that happened? What was going on in your life?
Yes, I think, I was an undergraduate student from France, and I was joining the Koshima Macaque project with a certain advisor named Dr. Andrew MacIntosh. So that's how I got the opportunity to come here and later to go down to Koshima. But my first kind of even interface with Japan was the Primate Research Institute of Kyoto University, and I was just, as an undergrad, the first time I heard about this institute was during a lecture, I think, at the University of Rennes in France, where I was doing the first year of my master's, and I heard about the Koshima macaques doing this sweet potato washing behavior, and then I got interested into Japanese primatology, how it started. And since that, I think I was just super excited to come here and to finally maybe see or meet all the people from whom I've seen publications.
It's neat because, in the Department of Ecology and Social Behavior, for example, over the years, we still have have had many of the retired professors who've stuck around and still attended seminars and things. I know you yourself, became close with Yukimaru Sugiyama, and would go on runs with him around the town of Inuyama. He's well into his 80s now, and you still see him out there. every day on his daily runs. So I feel like that, it's a very unique place from that respect. And then, those people take you back to the beginnings of primatology in Japan, and so many of those iconic stories, like you mentioned, the sweet potato washing and wheat washing in Koshima, where you ended up. But also, somebody like Sugiyama Sensei was, doing field work in India, and he was basically the person who first described and observed infanticide. Had a little bit of a different interpretation than the one that came out of Sarah Hurdy's ideas and books and papers from Harvard, but it really takes us to this historical places of primatology.
Yes, yeah, definitely. So you have the opportunity to meet this people in person. And I remember my first kind of introduction to PRI, where I also discovered this library on the third floor, where completely dedicated to primatology from different angles. But I was thinking, wow, it's so cool to have such resources only dedicated to that field. And I was really impressed by those corridors that you can automatically open and then who would line up like the famous journals in the field from back from even the 50s or the 60s. So you have all the collections. So this was super nice, and going around and being introduced to different people who at first I wasn't maybe really sure who they were. I only knew them by name, or I thought I knew. Yeah, this happened with David Hill, whom I've mistaken to another professor named Professor Hill. So yeah, some funny anecdotes.
I'm sure he's good-humored enough to not take it in a bad way.
Yeah, and the parasite lab, the chimpanzee lab, like all these kind of historical places and people. So we definitely not forget that for sure.
But so when you first came here, you didn't actually spend time at the Primate Research Institute itself in Inuyama. You went, I think, straight to Koshima, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah, almost. I think a couple of days or maybe weeks at the dorm. So just below where we are, and then I went straight to Miyazaki Prefecture and to the Ichiki village where the field station for the Koshima Macaque project is based. And I think I was there for a couple of months first, not on my own, but I was with the manager of the station, Suzumura-san, and
me in the beginning too. That was, you might remember, we spent a month there.
Yeah.
I had my son was only less than a year old at the time, or about a year old at the time. Maybe it just turned one, or even had his birthday down there. Around that time, and I remember Koshima is an interesting place because on the one hand it's this island which is not far away from the mainland. It's right there. We have a field station right near the beach that goes there, yet we still have to take boats there. And unfortunately in September October is a time when typhoons are still rolling around, and because of the nature of that the geography there, it stops us getting access from the mainland to island. So we ended up spending a lot of time at the field station or not being able to go. And then I think my son came down with the Teashi Kuchibyo. It's the hand, foot, and mouth disease that put me out after I'd caught it as well. So it was kind of not the best start that we had to your research career here so far.
Yeah, but
maybe you have a different impression.
Yeah, I didn't really remember all this. I definitely remember the first time I set foot on the island. I had my GoPro mounted on my head, right from before we took the boat, and it was very nice to finally see this place live that I've seen in my lectures. So, by
the way, that's a really cool experience for a supervisor as well. When you, for myself, seeing that beach, emerge from around the kind of small peninsulas on the island is pretty impressive, with the monkeys there, getting ready to get their food. But seeing it in all of the, subsequent generations, quote unquote, in the academic lineage was also pretty cool. So you were, I think, probably the first person that I was able to take to the island and have that experience with. But it's always fun to see people. You always get that kind of lighting up expression. So
Yeah, I feel honored.
yeah, I mean, there's so much history there and in this room. So
Yeah. But yeah, so that project in Koshima, and I think after, I mean, you stayed maybe like a week or
in the beginning,
something
yeah.
like that, and then I was on my own with the staff in the station, but also the people in the village, and I think that's where I had to learn the most Japanese I could to interact with the people, or even just to set at what time would be the boat the next morning with the boat drivers and fishermen. So this was like a wonderful first experience in the countryside of Japan, near this small island that's beside research, where also I've made my first friends, first experience regarding climatic events as well, like first earthquakes were happening in the field station, I remember.
Right.
It was like the inside of the living room kind of shaking, and I was like, wow. That's when the manager explained me that I would have to go up the hill in case there is any big alarm or something. So it was a completely new experience for an undergrad student. It's just and on the island as well. So you could sometimes not go to the island because of the weather or the condition, but you could also get stuck on the island. So I don't know if you remember that time where I got stuck on the island itself, and at that time. Yeah, I bought a small cell phone, but it was not, the connection wasn't good. And I didn't know when would be the next day where I could be picked up.
Right.
So this was a bit, I think almost a week there I spent it. And I think it's, I was reflecting on that after, it's probably the longest time period maybe in my life I had without any physical social interaction, without any human being. So it's kind of an interesting experience.
Good thing you had another incredibly social species.
Exactly.
not to suggest you were interacting with them necessarily, but
no. But I remember I was following them, and because think about not speaking for a week, for example.
Yeah.
When do you do that? Maybe on some kind of retreat, or that's where we were. So remember that I was thinking loudly while I was following them at some point.
Yeah, sure.
Then you picked me up, so that was okay.
I think this is probably an experience that many a field worker has kind of come across. But I don't know, something is unique about the way it happens on Koshima for sure. It's just that weirdness of being so close to everything but yet so far away at the same time. But so being on Koshima, I mean, you flash forward 9 years, and since that time when you first arrived, you've managed to cultivate like a really impressive research paradigm, and actually have become one of the pioneers of that. And that research paradigm is about investigating parasite avoidance through, and you can just say it, the emotion of disgust. And so back at that time, maybe that's not how it was being thought of or framed, but so maybe you can walk us through like what led to the earliest observations and experiments that you had there that's kind of laid the seed or planted the seed for this idea.
So I was collecting data for the Koshima macaque project when I was doing focal sampling. So I was
by the way, we should clarify that when you say Koshima macaque project, I'm sure nobody knows it.
Okay.
Because it's not really out there as such. But that was a project that I started that was funded by the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, and was interested in looking at the relationships between sociality and parasite infection, and then also the influences that parasites might have on the fitness, the health, the reproduction, the survivability of and body condition of macaques on the island. And so that was the general context that kind of brought you there. But
so I was following the macaques from dawn to dusk. I was doing 15 minutes focal sampling, and I was also collecting fecal samples for the project. For a couple of months. I was just interested in, I had very broad interest, and I also started thinking what I could do for my own project, or to develop my own project. And what kind of interested me the most were like some of these more anecdotal behaviors, and as maybe some of the listeners know or don't know, but Japanese macaques, but maybe the macaque genus in general, have lots of interesting behaviors related to food and like food processing behaviors. And the Japanese macaques on Koshima would do lots of so washing, the sweet potato washing behavior is a famous example of it, but also acorns in the forest. They also catch some big earthworms called mimizu that they also have a way to process before ingesting, or even sometimes they would catch fish, or even like puffer fish. And I was really intrigued into how they get rid of basically or seemingly what they don't like, or what can be either toxic or dangerous to them, and then only eat the good parts of it, if I can say.
Can you, so just for the listeners, can you describe, because we've both seen this and marveled at it, but can you describe what it looks like to see a macaque processing one of those giant Japanese earthworms? Yes,
definitely. So, and I had a talk recently with a student here about that. So it seems to be either opportunistically, like there is a season like early fall on the island where these big black earthworms are quite common. You would see them crawling around. And it seems that when they appear atop the leaf litter, like I was following some of the females, and when they would see one appear, they would just catch it. And once they catch it, they have this way of stretching it repetitively, rubbing it within their two hands, removing the head with their teeth, spitting it out, stretching it again, maybe until separating it into two pieces. And then they would flatten it on some rock or substrates to discard the intestines and the inside. If there is a water stream nearby, they may carry it over and then rub it within the water. And then they would only eat the skin. So there are lots of potential hypotheses into why they may do so, but this is one of the most interesting food processing behavior I've seen on that island. And as I mentioned, so they would do so with other food items, and I was really interested into that. And then there were some other anecdotes happening because these macaques, there are two troops on the island of about 50 individuals, and one of these troop is provisioned with grains of wheat, so 2 to 3 times a week. And interestingly, so when the grains of wheat are distributed on the beach, the beach would also become the area of potential conflict. So conflict and stress means potential defecation. So you would have lots of feces around. It's great for researchers. We can collect lots of samples. But interestingly, you would also have some grains of wheat, which would, by accident, just as they are distributed, hit the top of feces. And it was kind of funny to realize at the end of the feeding time that the sandy floor would be completely clean of grains of wheat, but only those atop feces would remain. So I thought, interesting. Seems like the macaques would not eat them, would not touch them. And then a few more observations, like a female I was following who would by accident put her back foot into one of these conspecific feces as she was feeding, and then she just crossed all the beach on her 3 legs. She found the dead tree trunk and she meticulously rubbed her back foot on that, and repeatedly smelling it and rubbing it and smelling it and rubbing. And that's how this idea or this interest for the origins of disgust and hygiene just emerged. And then I did some literature research. That's how I found more about the theory, or about the work of Val Curtis, who was part of my PhD committee as well, based at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, who wrote a lot about the origins of disgust. Then I thought, great, I have my master's project, and that's how I guess we continue working on that.
We'll come back to Val a bit later, I think, but so back to those observations. I remember when you first floated me the idea. So the whole point here was you came to work on this project, but I was pretty adamant that, since you also wanted to get experience in research, and I thought it was important that you also design your own study for a master's project. And so you did that, and that was what you took off with. So you designed these experiments, which you can explain in a minute. But I remember when you first floated the idea, you might remember too, I mean, kind of looked at you like, I was very intrigued and interested, and I thought, all of that same stuff that you just said was really interesting. But I also was a bit skeptical because you can imagine how it comes off to others. And the idea that, testing whether a monkey would be aversive to feces, whether it's its own or some other, it almost seems like something so obvious. But yet, there are some profound questions that arise from doing that simple work that you did. So what kind of experiments did you set up on Koshima Beach?
Yeah, so I started with 3 kind of experiments / behavioral observations. The first one was this feces avoidance experiment where I would, since the beach was anyway the ground for feces, I just would collect some fecal samples from the macaques, and then design a kind of partially isolated areas from the rocks. So I would attract the targeted subject to that area, so you would be hidden from other subjects, and then I would have already lined up on the sandy floor these 3 items. One of them was this fresh conspecific feces. Another one was a plastic feces replica, which would have similar range of color and shape, although looking maybe somewhat different. So we'll come back to that. And the control item was a piece of brown plastic notebook. So same material, probably similar smell, same range of color, but very different shape. And then I would dispose on each of them, atop each of them, either a grain of wheat, which I started with, or half a peanut. And half a peanut is already 16 times more calories than a grain of wheat. So,
and we know the monkeys in Koshima love them.
And they love peanuts. So interestingly, what we found is that the macaques across the 16 individuals I tested, and 5 trials each, that they would feed all of them across all trials atop the control substrate, so this piece of brown plastic notebook, but they would avoid feeding atop the fresh conspecific feces, and to a lower extent, but still significantly less than atop the control on the feces replica, the plastic feces replica. So this was, an interesting experiment. At the same time, it seemed that we can see from the videos that the macaques would use multiple cues, sensory cues, to kind of guide maybe their foraging decisions. So I have this famous for myself, but video of,
and for anyone who's seen my talks as well,
of that female who would
Cécile.
Yeah, Cécile. She would first go towards the plastic feces replica, and she would smell it, and then there is this this behavior where she would turn her ear towards the feces. And after doing these 2 kind of investigations, she would go towards the conspecific. She already ate the grain of wheat atop the piece of brown plastic notebook, and then she goes towards the fresh conspecific feces. And you can see that there is lots of
for lack of a better word, hesitation, and those hesitative behaviors, right?
I was hesitating to say that word, but there is a big gap of time before so she's just waiting there, she's looking around, it's also interesting.
Scratching herself, so a lot of self-directed behavior.
Yeah, doing that, and then finally, after some time, just after 2 minutes or so, like she would pick up the grain of wheat. She would rub it with her hands repetitively a couple of times, and then she would eat it with her wrists, which was kind of funny because she would not put her fingers in contact with.
We'll link in the show notes. In the podcast, we'll link to the video so that anyone listening who's interested can go and check out the actual video itself, which is a supplemental video to the published study.
So there was this experiment, and then a couple of additional ones. One which involved more this natural behavior that they do in the forest on processing, so rubbing rolling acorns that they found. They dig under the leaf litter to find these acorns, and then they would do so before ingesting it. But individuals would also do it with seemingly some kind of variability. So not all individuals would do it the same, or some would put it straight away in their mouth as well, a few of them. And the last experiment was kind of testing for why would macaques wash the sweet potatoes. So I was kind of intrigued by the earlier observations and experiments, and I wanted to know, or my kind of hypothesis was that they would process or wash the sweet potatoes to remove potentially the sand that may stick on it. And sand can be conducive of parasites as well. So what I did, I distributed I had two conditions, one where the piece of sweet potatoes was covered with sand, and the other one where the piece of sweet potato was washed with tap water beforehand, to kind of test also for this hypothesis. There is one hypothesis that says that the macaques would wash the sweet potatoes to salt potentially the sweet potatoes. And at least our experiments showed that they would rarely and significantly wash more the one covered with sand than the one they would actually bite it straight away when it's already washed with tap water. So these were the kind of experiments I started in Koshima, and got me intrigued into digging more.
Yeah, I mean, that one was neat because it got to, dovetail with the earliest studies of sweet potato washing and cultural transmission in macaques, and actually test a little bit about what the critical function of that behavior ends up being. And, to add on to that, I mean, those experiments are really interesting, but you probably remember when there was another aspect to this study, which is that we also measured the parasitism of each individual. And when you show me, or when we had the data, and I remember looking at my computer on the screen, and you pulled up this chart, which was showing the relationship between the kind of hygiene axis that we came up with all the, how hygienic each individual was based on their performance in these different kind of tasks or observations, and the extent of their parasite infection with geohelminths, which are, parasitic worms that we can all get from the soil and things like that. And that line was perfectly linear and very steep, and it just showed us that the relationship between hygiene and infection was really clear. And the more hygienic individuals had fewer parasites. And I mean, that was one of the clearest examples of like a linear trend in an ecological study I've ever seen. So I just remember being so excited and thinking, I mean, is this really...
Yeah, I remember that too. With your cup of coffee and kind of, maybe now I convinced you or something. And okay, then we could do more work.
Yeah, I mean, that really started like an interesting series of studies and got you to some pretty cool places too. So, maybe without going into too much detail of them, you followed that up by heading to Africa and doing some work with great apes in different research centers and sanctuaries there.
Yeah, so this first project in Koshima then lined up for their experiments in Gabon. I wanted to test great apes. On that topic specifically, there was a theory, but there was clearly a lack of empirical evidence and experimental evidence. So I went to Gabon, to the Siamph in Gabon, where I could test chimpanzees, but also mandrills, so captive chimpanzees, and semi-free ranging in like very large enclosures, and long-tailed macaques as well. So I could continue and kind of go or dig deeper into what kind of, I was really interested into which kind of sensory cues they may use to, or which kind of sensory cues may provoke these foraging aversion, foraging decisions. So I could test visual, olfactory, and even tactile cues with the chimpanzees. And yeah, I don't know if I want to. You can check our papers to know the results. So I don't say it all, but
I think the really cool part of that is, as you said, you got to test this range of different cues that the animals could use, that the great apes could use to detect and then avoid, risky situations in terms of potential disease or parasitism. But the one thing out of those series of studies that really struck me was the tactile thing. When you had the chimpanzees reaching into a box, I think everyone listening can probably imagine a time in their life where someone presented them with a box and said, okay, put your hand inside and see what mystery is. And you put your hand inside and it's like, it could be this really disgusting substance or whatever, but you used
scary, yeah.
dough and...
Yeah, so I replicated a study actually that had been done in humans with psychologists studying disgust and who were particularly interested into these tactile cues, and with the theory that in nature substrates or substances with physical features such as softness and moistness are usually pretty good at cultivating or harboring pathogens or growth of bacteria, and so what they used was this either a dough substrate, or as a control a dry and hard piece of rope. And so I placed either of those inside an opaque box. The chimps would see me placing a piece of banana inside the box, but in order to reach for that piece of banana they would have to touch the substrate, and they didn't know what was in there. So they knew there was a piece of banana, but what happened is that after touching the dough substrate, we would observe lots of recoiling of the hand and not going further or not going a second time for it, whereas after with the rope condition they would reach for the banana and put it straight to the mouth. So
again, the videos of that are just fascinating. And I mean, when you see, and every time I've shown this to an audience, when you see the chimpanzee reach into the box and physically recoil in, pretty much almost exactly the same way a human would, it's hard not to feel a sense of sympathy with the feeling that the animal is having, and that could easily lead us to at least hypothesizing that the motivation for the behavior is similar to ours as well, is that they're actually disgusted by this. But so around this time as well, and I think this is something really rare for somebody at your career stage at that time as a PhD student, still candidate, you were invited to host a meeting at the Royal Society on parasite avoidance and disgust. And at that meeting, which you did not alone, but with colleagues, including Val Curtis, who was one of the main spearheads of that initiative.
And Dr. Rachel Macmillan from the Open University.
Right. And in that meeting, you were able to bring together not just animal behaviorists and biologists, but also human psychologists. And so can you maybe just walk us through what that experience was like for you as somebody just kind of starting in a research career still, but now being the leader of a meeting at the Royal Society and having really world experts in all of these topics.
So I guess I was lucky, or I mean, Valerie Curtis, Prof. Curtis contacted me because she was basically too busy to take on that meeting, and she basically proposed that opportunity, or that she had a colleague who wanted to put together that kind of meeting with her, and she provided the opportunity for me to actually co-organize it with Dr. Macmillan, and I was really excited about that. The idea of this meeting about the evolution of pathogen and parasite avoidance behaviors was to gather a bunch of scientists, but working on very different model species, and so. With Rachel, we managed to gather people studying Cynoabditis elegans, from Cynoabditis elegans, this 302 neurons worm, up to humans and everything in between almost. So from birds, fish, kangaroos, primates. So and being able to be all together in this small castle,
like an old estate in the British countryside
in Buckinghamshire in the UK, was the perfect environment and the perfect size as well. I think that's also a feedback we've got. We were don't remember the exact number of the registrants, but I think we were not over 30 or 40 in total in that meeting, with maybe 10-15 keynote speakers, and and that was the perfect size and place to just brainstorm and exchange avenues for the future of the field. And that's where I've made great connections as well with whom I still have contact today.
Mm-hmm.
So of course, at my stage, it was a big step for me, and being given that opportunity by kind of the expert on the human maybe side of it, but with all the theory about the evolution of it as well, was just a dream come true.
I mean, I think that's a good place to return to Val Curtis, because I mean, she unfortunately a couple of years ago last year departed us, but I think she, in the short time that you knew her, ended up being a really important mentor and role model. And she herself also was engaged in so many different things, not just the science, but also humanitarian work. And so maybe you want to just talk a little bit about who she was and what she meant to you.
Yes, for sure. So my kind of connection to Prof. Curtis started when I was an undergrad, and so just after the Koshima chapter, I wanted to start this PhD on this topic of the origins of disgust and hygiene, and then that's how I found more about the literature about it, and of course lots of papers written by Val, and a book more particularly called Don't Touch, Don't Look, which so after that I wanted to meet her, and I just got the opportunity before returning to Japan to visit her in London at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She invited me over. We had a cup of tea in her office full of fake poop. So I was kind of also, wow, I found my peer there. My peer.
And now my office is the one that has all the fake poop in it.
Yes, I'm leaving. That's my present to you. And we exchanged. She was also very, very excited about the Koshima results and what I was discussing to her about. So that's where she gave me her book and dedicated it for me. And after that we had been in touch all along. She was part of my PhD committee. And Val is not only important for all of what she has put for disgust research, but also the applications of it, and something I'm also very interested in it. So she had started campaigns promoting hand washing based on disgust and showing how the power of this emotion could be translated into promoting sanitary behaviors, which is super interesting. So she had done lots of works in India, on the African continent as well, and in different places. And she still is definitely a big role model to me. So, but unfortunately, the irony of it is that she left us recently, but I was able to attend her last lecture, which is online if you're interested in it, where she's reflecting about all her decades in public health and disgust, which is very interesting.
Yeah, it was sad to see her go, and during a pandemic, but unrelated to it, at least directly. For somebody who was such a monumental figure in public health and hygiene. But so you said something really important too, was that she was influential in being able to apply the ideas from the research on disgust and how it can maybe be used for humanitarian purposes and help, especially in parts of the world where sanitation is not necessarily as developed as it could be. But so I think that's also something that's really important to you, is being able to apply the knowledge you gain through science and research. And so maybe you can just highlight some of the ways that that you're thinking about, that you could maybe use your research for good in that area.
Yeah, so Val got me definitely thinking about the applications of it, and so far it has always been this fascination for the origins of disgust and hygiene, and on the other side, kind of my involvement or activism or dedication and passion for conservation, and then I realized that maybe those two fields are not necessarily shouldn't be necessarily apart, and that there could be ways also to merge both in a way, similarly as Val put it up for promoting sanitary behavior. I think we are in an era where, as we are currently experiencing, pathogens also transmit from one host to another, including our closest living phylogenetic relatives, so non-human primates, in particular great apes. And so one way this could be done would be to actually work on human disgust and promoting behaviors that would enhance distances with wildlife, for example. If we take the example of a touristic context, we and on social media, on the internet, even including in academia itself, we see a lot of proximity sometimes, even so with our research species from some researchers, but also in a touristic context with people visiting these emblematic species and wanting to take a selfie with it, or wanting to get very close and even having physical contacts with them. And to me, this is wrong in so many ways, but I think there is, and in one way would be also the risk of pathogen transmission that can expose them. So people have maybe no idea about that, or at least before COVID. So kind of raising the risk of this pathogen transmission could be one way of enhancing more appropriate distance with wildlife, and that's what I would be interested in testing in one way or another. So that's one part, and then the other part is still about human-wildlife interactions, and there are negative interactions all over the world as well, to not say conflict, and some of them are related to actually foraging behaviors of wildlife. So knowing more about these adaptive systems in wildlife and designing measures that are rather based on the ecology and the evolution of the species is, to me, would be very, very interesting to test through different sensory cues and with the new technology we have, or even the very simple designs, but I think would be interesting to test around agricultural fields, for example, and just to think about it from different perspectives depending on the species.
So I kind of want to go sideways a little bit with this, and maybe away from the research and into another aspect of you, I think, that people can appreciate, is that ever since you started here, and you mentioned it earlier about activism, you've always had a really strong interest in not just being a typical grad student and working on your research project and writing papers and whatever, but also experiencing things and doing things. And a lot of those things, were related to travel, and were stemming from compassion of people, of the environment. And you also got into a lot of things here, like being a regular host and producer of the podcast, the Primatecast, for Conservation Voices. But when did that start for you, and how, why is that such an important part of who you are as well, in addition to doing research? And maybe you can use some examples of the initiatives that you've been working on since being at Kyoto University.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly when it started, but to me, from the time you join the field of research and animal behavior, I don't know. It has always been important to not only observe them or test them, but find ways to raise awareness about different issues, either surrounding them, but more I learned about the field of animal behavior, and more I would reflect on our own human behavior. So, and not that I'm that old, but at that time I was just, I couldn't, I needed to be very active in that. It was very important to me. Not that I'm completely inactive today, but just to mention. And so when I arrived here, there were also opportunities to really get engaged in that. And I guess once also you become a master student or a PhD student in that field, I felt it gave you also, I don't know if it's bad to say, but maybe I was thinking I have more credibility that now I can really do things, and people would maybe take me more seriously. So that's when I think most of my initiatives in that started. So I was really into the podcast. I was not necessarily very, very good in podcasting, but I was just thinking that going to all these conferences, meeting all these researchers, conservationists, I just wanted to reach more people, and so
I think one thing that maybe we differed in the beginning too is that in this podcast I was always interviewing established scientists mostly, and I remember you pushing back and saying, well, can we interview more young people and students and things? And so in your case, you went to those the student conference in conservation science, like 2 or 3 of them in different parts of the world, and was a correspondent for the Primatecast and Conservation Voices there. And so I think it's like I think you're invested also in the ideas of young people in that sense too, and wanted to share a lot of what they're doing, which I think now, especially with the climate change issue and people like Greta Thunberg out there, really attest to something that was a good initiative for sure, because more and more those young voices are the ones that seem to be the most reasonable and rational.
Yeah. Yes, so conservation voices was one way. And although it still involved lots of troubles, which I think I've also reflected on that since. So that's the kind of paradox, I guess. And then another initiative that I started here was Conserve Session. So I was also I realized the potential for having more outreach initiatives at Kyoto University, but including Inuyama as well. And I had the feeling that there was also a lack of it. But lots of people still coming over, or even lots of resources already here that I thought, and by resources I mean researchers, professors that were not exploited well enough to reach to the public, not to other scientists, but to have interactions with the public. So I was also very much interested in documentaries related to environmental issues, conservation, and I thought, well, maybe we have a bit of budget, why not designing a student group where we could screen documentaries, having topics like each month, and inviting an expert to interact and exchange with the public about that topic. And that's how it started. Mainly with international researchers at first, but as we grew and also getting diversity in the group, and we also wanted more and more to reflect on Japanese researchers and activists, filmmakers, and that led to great connections as well. Talking about ivory trade in Japan, making a podcast also on that topic, or whaling, all this kind of
I mean, it was
topics and issues. So.
And it was neat that they were also open to the public. So especially for the issues surrounding whaling, for example, you would have members of the public come in, and we had translators there, and it was this really kind of high-level discussion between people about those issues. So I think, not just having, from our perspective, this kind of, academic perspective, we also have people from all kind of spectra of society coming and contributing their ideas. So that was, I think, really valuable for everybody, and especially the students in our program. I mean, to be able to see that in action, and so it was a really impressive initiative that was going on.
But I guess it's also started. I mean, I was empowered by that with CICASP, so
right.
the Center for International Collaboration and Advanced Studies in Primatology, where we are sitting in the studio right now, and having these SciComm workshops, really empowered me into leading or initiating this kind of activities. So.
Yeah, it's been really important to us over the years to kind of do whatever we can to facilitate that in students and encourage them to get involved in whatever way they can. We've recently seen some success from that too, with our graduate students, winning or becoming runners-up in thesis presentation competitions across Japan, and various people starting to get more engaged in in media and social media about specific topics. So you're a really good role model in that sense as well, because we can always have someone to point to, like, hey, if you have an interest in doing something, we'll support it, and just go ahead. So circling back then, just to kind of, you finished your PhD in 2018.
19.
19. Yeah, the pandemic has the time warp going on here. 2019. But then you came back for a postdoc as well here at the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, working more with Dr. Ikuma Adachi here and myself as well, and with the chimpanzees. So maybe, just to close out that part of the interview, can you describe kind of what the point of that is and what research you've been doing with the chimpanzees here, and where you really think this kind of field of disgust and landscapes of disgust in animals is kind of heading?
Yeah. So I came back here to after looking at the behavioral side of parasite avoidance and the origins of disgust. I wanted to complete the picture by kind of getting deeper into the cognitive and physiological mechanisms behind it. And so that's how we started thinking of how we could test that, and the chimpanzee lab at PRI was kind of the perfect place for that, with those cognitive tasks using touch screens, for example, on a voluntary basis with the chimpanzees, or even using eye trackers now, where you can test different visual stimuli and see how the chimpanzee would react to it and would look at it. So I started experiments which are still actually running, or will keep being run even after tomorrow. And the idea was to use the paradigm already present. So these chimpanzees are actually quite famous for a number of cognitive tasks, including one which is named the number ordering task, where they would have to touch numerals in an ascending order on touch screens, basically showing how they would be able to count and the cognitive mechanism of it. So I was thinking that that's the perfect task to test how different sensory cues may affect their cognitive performance, for example. How we could test that, and also just kind of going deeper into the comparison of how different emotions and threats may have that kind of impact. So trying to test and compare disgust versus fear, eliciting stimuli. Yeah, it was another interest here, and this keeps being expanded with now an eye tracking study. So maybe there will be more on that in the forthcoming podcasts.
Right, we'll have to leave a little bit of mystery with this, because the data are still incoming and results are not yet out there. But I do think it's fascinating. In the lab you have the opportunity to control the experiments that you're doing, but more and more we see scientists, animal behavior scientists, being interested in kind of opposing these ideas of landscapes of fear versus landscapes of disgust, where in nature an animal would be presented with all kinds of different, cost-benefit situations, and they have to make decisions, based on that information that they have, or,
So this has a name even now, a landscape of peril.
A landscape of peril, exactly, right, which is fantastic.
Combine both kinds of threats, and these two, predation and parasitism, are two very important evolutionary pressures that many animals would have to deal with. So that's fascinating, and being able to even test it in a lab is definitely exciting. And so one of the comments I guess sometimes we would get from maybe outsiders' perspectives into investigating disgust in non-human primates is yes, okay, now you've got the behavioral side, but if you really want to name it disgust, maybe what's going on with the cognition behind it, or even the physiological reactions. And this is something that you can do non-invasively in a way now with the new technology. So that's where what I'm currently working on. But as for the future, I think I would go back to that connection with conservation, and I would be very interested into how we can use the landscape of disgust, the landscape of peril, to drive animal behavioral decisions, and maybe human also behavioral decisions. So.
Okay, well, just to wrap up this interview, I'm not going to ask you about what you're doing next, because I think we should leave some shroud of mystery for any interested listeners can see where Cécile pops up next. But I do want to ask you to just maybe take a moment and reflect on 9 years of being at Kyoto University's Primate Research Institute. What stands out for you? What do you think you're going to hold on to?
Should I put a long silence?
I'll edit it out later anyway, so you look spot on.
Well, obviously the people. Yes, definitely the people. But you could say, okay, beside the people, the chimps, the other primates, and the place, all the surrounding environment in and out of PRI. It's just it feels like I don't know. It feels like it's at home and like a family here. I mean, you would see people walking on flip-flops in the corridor, and it's just it feels. Or you can, and the institute. I don't know if I should say that, but the institute is always open, or you always have access to it. I think over the 9 years, or at least the number of years where I was in Inuyama, I would probably spend more time at the institute than maybe at my place, at least as a student.
Sure.
Not to encourage that kind of behavior, but just to
work-life balance is very important.
To say the truth, at least as a PhD student. So, and going from having access to the studio, to the library, going from office to office, SciCast, the parasite lab, the chimpanzee lab, it was just very stimulating, and a strong sense of community, at least with the other students and professors as well. So that's definitely the kind of memories and anecdotes I won't say here that I would remember.
That's right. Some were not fit for the air, for sure. Okay, well, Cécile Sarabian, it's been a pleasure to have you on the Primatecast. Hopefully not for the last time.
Yeah.
But there should be more from you in the future. But I wish you the best of luck. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and definitely will miss you.
And reciprocally, all the best to Dr. Andrew MacIntosh. I wonder where the next podcast would be.
So do I. Well, let's see. I'll try and get this one up as soon as possible. Thanks again, and all the best for the future.
Thanks a lot.
You have been listening to the Primatecast, a podcast series dedicated to all things primatology and wildlife research, to the conservation of species, and to the dissemination of scientific knowledge. The podcast is brought to you by the Center for International Collaboration and Advanced Studies in Primatology at the Kyoto University Primate Research Institute. Visit us online at theprimatecast.com and follow our social media feeds on Facebook and Twitter at the Primatecast. Conservation Voices is an offshoot of the Primatecast, hosted and produced by Dr. Cécile Sarabian.